In the 21st century, those who change the world are those who change the culture. They get people in sync, lead tribes, create movements, and generate an energy field where ordinary people achieve extraordinary results.
Businesses are pushing people too hard and too far. Lawyers, city bankers, junior doctors and tech startup employees are all renowned for being overworked and outworking each other. So I believe there's a better way to run a business, one that puts people and purpose first and on a par with profit, rather than in pursuit of profit alone. Because if you treat people like battery hens, aiming for high productivity over long hours in confined spaces, it's just not going to work. So at Propellernet, we know that squeezing more and more out of tired people isn't going to light anyone's fire. So well-being isn't a string of tactical activities that tick a CSR box. It's the core of what we stand for. It's the foundation of our people first strategy. And it's not just what we do on our staff jollies, but it's how we work day in, day out, and that's make life better in action.
I'm Aga Bayer, and this is the Culture Lab podcast, where you will find ideas and inspiration on how to harness the power of team and organizational culture. I talk to leadership thinkers, culture experts, entrepreneurs, and all sorts of movers and shakers, and together we explore the fascinating topic of culture, leadership, and personal growth. If you like what you hear, subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. Or better yet, write a review on iTunes and share the podcast with your followers and friends on social media. For more, check out our archive at www.agabayer.com/podcast. Hello and welcome to episode 57. So I think the last time I recorded an intro, Lombardy in Italy was the first place in Europe to be in lockdown. And now we are officially facing a global pandemic. And I'm sure that wherever you are, it has had an impact on you in some way. And so I'm just hoping that you are staying safe and healthy, and so are your loved ones. I've also decided that for as long as we're going to go through this truly unprecedented situation, we are going to add short-form episodes to our podcast. They will be called the Culture Lab audio postcards, and true to the nature of a postcard, they will be short, sweet, and positive, and sent to you with an intention to keep in touch and help you navigate these uncharted waters that we all found ourselves in. It also felt weird to release a new episode without getting an update from our guests and some sort of commentary on the current events. So I did get an update from Nikki Gatenby, whom I interviewed at the end of 2019, and you will hear it shortly. Nikki was the Chief Growth Officer at Propellernet and the co-founder and CEO at Search Listening at the time of this interview. And a couple of weeks ago, she announced that she leaves Propellernet to embark on a new journey as the non-executive director and coach at Gatenby's Consulting. We had a blast talking to Nikki, and you will hear it all in a moment. But first, here is a message from her about the current situation.
This podcast comes to you at the height of the coronavirus pandemic. The content of the podcast was recorded late in 2019, when we were blissfully unaware of the challenges that COVID-19 presents today. However, the essence of the podcast, leading human-centred organisations and transforming business by putting people and purpose first, still stands. The biggest challenge we face right now as individuals and companies is the uncertainty we've been thrown into at a pace we didn't know was possible, except maybe for Bill Gates. He predicted this in 2015. Check out his TED Talk. Smart guy, but we're not all Bill. When the direction of travel is unknown and the speed of change is so fast, it's difficult to navigate with any degree of certainty. It's heartbreaking to see so many incredible businesses and people face such challenges. Every single one of us will be impacted in some way. Nobody would choose this, but we do have a choice in how we react to it. And having an eye on the future, as this will pass, is both a challenge and a comfort, and an essential part of how we act at this stage. In light of the unprecedented economic impact of the virus, it may be a time for reflecting on what we all value and what this could teach us about what we deem as success. Should global GDP growth be the only indicator, or should we be looking at things beyond commercial wealth? At a time when humans the world over have never relied so heavily on each other to get through a crisis, other measures of wealth, gross national happiness, innovation, creativity and productivity, along with positive climate change, should all be on the global balanced scorecard for success. And these are all based on human connection, community, society, even in one where we can't touch, hug and hold each other anymore, for the time being anyway. Let's learn from this and enable future generations to enjoy this planet we've inherited. That's the legacy we should want to leave, to create the beginning of a new era, and it's within our power to do so. In amongst the current chaos, and we're all in it together, I find that an engaging thought. Good luck, everyone. Keep talking, keep sharing, keep collaborating, keep listening. We've got this.
Okay, so after this note from Nikki, here is our conversation. Enjoy. Nikki, welcome to Culture Lab. I'm so excited and so happy that you accepted our invitation.
You're welcome. I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for making the time. I know that you are busy running 2 businesses now. So I'm really curious to learn how that's going as well. But before we jump into our conversation, I just want to ask you to briefly introduce yourself to our listeners.
Okay, I'm Nikki Gatenby, Owner and Chief Growth Officer at Propellernet in Brighton. We're a creative, commercial, independent marketing agency, and we help brands to be found for the products and services they deserve to be famous for, hand in hand with being one of the top 15 best places to work in the UK. But I also wear a second hat, as you say, being co-founder and CEO at Search Listening, where we help people uncover unbiased, powerful insights about customers based on what they truly think and actually do. It's akin to social listening, where you observe digital behaviour, but search listening is based on the unbridled truth that we all type into search engines, revealing truly candid, anonymised customer insight. So I'm fascinated by what makes people tick, and over the last 20 years I've been experimenting with entrepreneurial ways of working in competitive agencies in London, Paris and now Brighton. So what makes people tick is my thing, and engagement is my topic.
Oh, so fascinating. And I can't wait to talk about this. But before we do, there's one question that I ask to all our guests at the very beginning of the interview, because as you know, this is a podcast about culture. And I am really fascinated about people's experiences with culture, especially during their childhood. So this first question is, what were your cultural influences and what shaped you as a kid?
Well, I was brought up in the UK in a large extended family, one sibling, but many cousins. And it was like a ready-made set of friends, and we were always surrounded by someone to muck about with. And at school, in my early days and at college, I was big into sports teams and found my tribes in the netball, hockey, football and rugby teams. And once more, I get amongst the messiness and madness of big groups of people, working hard, playing hard, full of fun and laughter. And I think that's why I really enjoy the company of others. And it fascinates me how this works in different cultures. And as such, I've lived and worked in a range of cities from London to Detroit, Paris, and now Brighton, because people fascinate me, and understanding more about what makes them tick is a lifelong passion.
So fascination with people is this theme, this thread that runs through your life. Mm-hmm. And I know that you've had a lot of experience working for other marketing agencies and running other marketing agencies. So I want us to dive straight into what Propellernet is and how it's different from those other companies. Let us know the key things that you would say make it unique.
Okay, so the foundations of Propellernet are fundamentally different. The whole purpose of the business is to make life better, which is quite unusual for a marketing agency. And we start with well-being to fuel innovation and creativity. So I'll explain. I worked in, as you say, lots of creative media agencies and the client world for my entire career. And it's a brilliant place to be on so many levels. But it's also highly, highly competitive in a good way, but it can lead to the human factor being swallowed up in the pursuit of profit. And we have a real issue with burnout in our industry, and it's unfortunately not getting any better. So the importance of well-being at work isn't new, but it's increasingly making the news as a problem of epidemic proportions. And closer to home, many of us have felt the impact of stress-related health problems, via friends and family or business associates who've had early heart attacks due to pressure at work. And in one extreme case, loss of life due to depression. And I don't think it's acceptable for a career in marketing, a relatively cerebral, engaging environment to be life-threatening. It's just, it's not confined to our industry either. All over the planet, businesses are pushing people too hard and too far. Lawyers, city bankers, junior doctors, and tech startup employees are all renowned for being overworked and outworking each other. So I believe there's a better way to run a business, one that puts people and purpose first and on a par with profit, rather than in pursuit of profit alone. Because if you treat people like battery hens, aiming for high productivity over long hours in confined spaces, it's just not going to work. So at Propellernet, we know that squeezing more and more out of tired people isn't going to light anyone's fire. So well-being isn't a string of tactical activities that tick a CSR box. It's the core of what we stand for. It's the foundation of our people first strategy. And it's not just what we do on our staff jollies, but it's how we work day in, day out. And that's make life better in action.
I love that. And I think a lot of people who are listening to our conversation right now will think, yes, indeed, there are not a lot probably of marketing agencies or digital marketing agencies I know of, or many other companies for that matter, that have a similar purpose, which is making life better. And I suppose that for a lot of people, a question that arises is, what does it really mean? What does it really mean to make life better as a digital marketing agency? And what does it really mean practically to have people first culture? So could you give us a few examples, what decisions you are taking and how you are operating differently because you have this purpose and because you want to be and you are people first culture?
Absolutely. And I'm going to break that into two parts. So I do, what does it mean to make life better? Well, primarily our core belief is that everyone has a right to enjoy life. And secondly, business was created by humans, not the other way around. So business should be there as a force for good, not something we become slaves to. And we live in a world where only 30% of people are engaged in their jobs, meaning the other 70% have left their ingenuity at home, probably not bringing their full selves to work, possibly just turning up hoping not to get fired. What a waste of our collective human intelligence is that, and how bad is it for business? We've got some big problems to solve on this planet. Imagine what we could do if the other 70% were fully engaged. So taking these numbers to the bottom line, can you imagine the impact on your P&L by paying 100% of salaries for people who are only 30% engaged? You're potentially wasting 70% of your salary bill, and that's not an effective way to run a company. So against a backdrop of global engagement at around 30%, we flip that statistic, and it's 90% of the team are engaged at Propellernet. So why is that important? Well, it shows up in the numbers every time. 98% of our team would recommend working in the agency to others, and they actively do, which has a fantastically positive effect on new business, but also recruitment. Our staff turnover rate is less than 7%. Industry average, according to the latest IPA report, is 30%. So again, we benefit from the reduction in wastage and less time on re-recruiting and the pain of client knowledge leaving the business every time somebody walks out the door. We also only average 1 day off sick a year. The industry average is way higher, anywhere between 5 and 12 days, depending on what source you look at. Now, this isn't a presenteeism issue. It's just the fact that we take care of people and we want them to take care of themselves. Hence, they are less ill. So in terms of how that purpose shows up in our daily operations, we use it as a guiding principle, and we turn it into a question, will it make life better? Will it make life better to take on this client? Are we excited about their brand? And can we do great work for them? Can we help them achieve their personal goals? Because if we can't say yes to all of those questions, we should think long and hard about taking one as a business just for the revenue. And when it comes to our team, will recruiting this person make life better for them in the business? Can they do the work of their lives? Can they bring new energy and ideas? Are we excited about their experience and potential? Or are we taking them on just because we're busy and we simply need anyone to soak up the work? It's such a simple question, and it's so leveling to be able to answer yes or no to guide the decisions that you take.
Absolutely. And I think it's such a wonderful way to illustrate how a mission or business purpose can really drive your decisions in a company. It's basically as simple as you described, right? Just asking yourself, is this really going to ... whatever your purpose statement is? And it seems so simple to do, and yet so few organizations do that.
Well, it's really hard, because although it's a simple question, it's a bit like doing a press up. They're really simple, but they're really hard. Yeah. So it's actually hard to stick to it, because when you really need to recruit somebody and maybe the people you've interviewed aren't right, it's very tempting just to get somebody in to help. So you have to know, that you're going to stand by your guns, and everyone has to agree with it.
Yeah, totally. And I think for you almost created constraints that support you in being really thoughtful and mindful. For example, taking recruitment. I don't know if you still have that cap of 60 precious seats in your company, because there was a conscious decision to say, yes, we want to grow, but not necessarily in terms of headcount. And so we put a cap on the number of people that we'll have in our company to 60 people. Is it still 60 people?
Yes, and it really forces innovation and growth, because you don't just need to put more bums on seats to grow in the 21st century. I believe we should have smarter ways of working than that. And, we want to be a really good employer, but we want to make sure that every person is fulfilling their potential. We could arguably double the size of the agency in a short space of time, but would it necessarily double the quality of the work, double the margin, double the enjoyment in the business? So if you have a cap on the business, it forces you to think really long and hard about how you are going to grow. And for us, it's forced innovation in ways that we never knew would happen. And I'm sure we'll come on to talk about that when we look at how other people have contributed to the business overall.
Yes, absolutely. And I have some insights that maybe some of our listeners don't have yet, because I've read your book, Super Engaged, and there are a few really fantastic examples that illustrate that. But going back to your point about recruitment, I can also see how when you have that cap, you really become super careful about who you hire, because you know that you don't really have a lot of seats. So you can only afford to have the absolute best match for that particular position, or generally for that particular team. So it makes total sense for me. And I'm curious, do you have any thoughts on how other organizations could create similar constraints that would push them towards being more innovative? Because, thinking of people who listen to this podcast, and some of them reach out to us, I know that some of them come from large corporates. So we are talking about thousands, sometimes even tens of thousands of people. So that constraints of a number of people perhaps is not really attainable for them. But I was wondering what your thoughts would be about creating other constraints that can help teams to be more thoughtful, purposeful, and more productive.
It's a brilliant question, and it's one I was talking to with a friend who runs a much larger organisation than I do. And we talked about the fact that instead of going into recruitment, replacing roles like for like, which it tends to be the rule, you just replace what you've lost. You don't think about what you've lost. You reevaluate what is required, maybe not in the entire business, but in a specific area of it, because our world is changing at a pace that we have is unprecedented. And you might not necessarily need the same skill set of the person who's just left the business. You might need something else. So in our environment, we might not need another PR person. We might need a data scientist. So if the rule book is ripped up and it's not replaced like for like, it's what do we actually need? Which I know most businesses review the job descriptions, but if you just rip up the job description and you take a view overall, what is it actually to be future fit that the business needs?
I love that. And it's hiring for the real world, which I think sounds really logical. Why wouldn't you hire for the real world and for the real needs? But you are so right that in a lot of organizations, there is this job description that has been there for 30 years. And so organization will still use it to fill that position based on the same requirements that they had 10 years ago, which is crazy because their business has changed so much.
And I understand why. It's a tactical shortcut. We need to fill this need. But if you have a strategic view, it will probably change in an unbelievable way what the recruitment actually looks like. It just takes more time. But if you want to be existing in 5 years' time, 3 years' time, you need to do it.
Absolutely. So interesting. It's fascinating. And I want us to touch upon another point that you've raised, which is the evidence based on how you are doing as a company, that being people first company has a lot of benefits, including small attrition and sickness rate and so on and so forth. And I know that a lot of people will push back and maybe challenge that. And so on behalf of some of our listeners, I want to ask, is it possible that you have people first culture and you really take really good care of your people, and yet you don't deliver excellent results? What do you think of that?
It's a great question because you have to. There's no quick fix here. There's no overnight winning formula. It's a constant, ongoing, developing strategy, like everything else in business. And, being a great place to work and putting people first isn't being a nice place to work. It's about high challenge and people feeling stretched so they can develop and do the work of their lives. That's the reason for it. There's kind of an ulterior motive here. You want people to be doing really high quality work, not just turning up hoping not to get fired. It's not about creating a gilded cage for people to retire into either. It's not about this soft stuff. It's pretty hard hitting. That if you create an environment that's too soft and too lovely, you're not going to do anybody any favors. Your business, your clients, or your team. It's about engaging people. And I think there's some misconceptions as to what people first means. It means understanding people so they can do the work of their lives, not so they can just muck about and retire. That's not the intent.
Do the work of their lives. That's wonderful, because indeed, I don't know of anyone who has done the work of their lives sitting in their comfort zone and sipping herbal tea and chatting with their colleagues, right? Without doing anything challenging or uncomfortable sometimes. It just doesn't
Yes.
happen.
And from a leadership perspective, it means, maybe you can't rely on tick boxes, report cards. You have to have a human factor to what you're doing, and you have to be interested, and you have to push, and you have to ask difficult questions, but in a very supportive environment.
Yes.
And that's the change. It's not leadership that's automatic.
Yeah.
It's leadership that's intuitive.
Yeah, absolutely. And in your book, you've been really honest about your initial mistakes or things that you didn't get right immediately, because clearly the intention was always there. You always wanted to be a company that is focused on people's well-being and on making life better, but it didn't always go perfectly from day one. And one of the examples that you shared so generously, I think, for others to learn from, was about how at some point you discovered that, yes, you were having fun and yes, you were working on interesting projects, but actually only 30% of the work that people were doing was billable work.
Yes, we absolutely fell into our own trap.
Yeah.
In the beginning, we weren't making consistent, sustainable profit. It's fair to say, when we realised about the issue that only 30% of our time is being billed to clients, we were quite shocked. And it wasn't that people were necessarily being lazy. It was just that we didn't have the right structures in place to enable us to charge the right amounts to clients and actually be quite rigorous and challenging with our time. There was, people were doing client work. We just weren't charging for it. So therein lies an issue with the way their business is run. You can be too focused on people at the expense of profit. This people first is not 99% people, 1% profit. No. It's 51-49. There's a balance. But what I tend to find a lot of businesses is it's 95% profit, 5% people.
Absolutely.
And actually that can undermine the business in itself. There was a brilliant Gallup survey of 1.8 million employees last year, and they looked at employee engagement versus the bottom line. And it concluded that business divisions scoring at the top half of employee engagement had nearly double the performance impact compared with those at the bottom half. So that's regardless of organisation, industry, company, regardless of changing the economy or massive change in technology. So in simple terms and on a global scale, people who are engaged are natural brand ambassadors and deliver high quality outcomes. And I believe that's hard-nosed proof that being human pays off.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And there's also really interesting work that was published in the book, Firms of Endearment, about companies that are driven by purpose and meaning like yours is. And, it was fascinating to see that compared to SAP 500 companies, these companies had very often 10 times higher profitability and revenue, which is just mind-blowing. So it can translate, it can literally 10x your revenue and your profitability if you decide to take these hard decisions and ask these important questions like the one that you shared with us. Is it going to make life better? And what will it look like so that it has that possibility of making life better? I love that. So let's talk about how you create that environment, where you have that balance that you mentioned. And I know, again, from your book that you really make sure that there is a lot of clarity around expectations. And for us, culture geeks, we know that expectations are basically what drive culture. So the moment I saw the word expectations, I was like, oh, this is going to be really interesting. Let's see what's happening there. And I know that you really spend a lot of time and you are very intentional about clarifying expectations on what it takes to be a stunning colleague. So you have this whole thing about what a stunning colleague is, and you have conversations around that. So I would be really grateful if you could share that with our listeners.
Yes, absolutely. We found we needed a language to keep the high challenge and accountability alive and kicking. And this is what I mean. It's a constant, ongoing development strategy to keep your culture on track. It's not a tick box. It doesn't just happen overnight. So there's things that weren't right in our business, and it's never perfect, but we needed this language to keep the challenge high. So Stunning Colleague was something that was shared by Netflix a few years ago in terms of how they expect their people to operate. So I have no embarrassment in saying I saw it and thought it was wonderful shorthand for what we were trying to achieve. So we nicked it, and we interpreted it for the agency. And it's about a few key things. So having an excellent work ethic and injecting passion and enthusiasm into your work, striving to produce award-winning work. That's not the only reason to do work, but if it's award-winning, it's recognised by your peers, which is what a lot of people want to achieve in their life. Not settling for average, aiming for more than that. Now that one's hard because what is average and what's better than average, but it's an intent rather than a red line. Inspiring each other, this probably comes back from my childhood, but if you've chosen to work in a team, you need to be a team player. You need to be part of that team. You need to be egging everybody else on. There's some Harvard Business research that shares that any toxic employee can destroy the goodwill of 2 others. That's a price not worth paying, I suggest. Another key point for us is being helpful and approachable, just being human. And the biggest thing for us in our continuously changing world is about being curious. So I know that's quite a lot, but it's not something we have a 3-line whip on, but it's an intent to say, if you're going to be here, you need to be thinking about these things going forward.
I love that. And at the same time, I am curious, how do you make it all work? Because we've also seen examples like, for example, with Uber, that, on paper, when you looked at the first set of values that they had with Kalanick, they were all good values, and there was definitely a lot of challenge and being the best and high performance and so on and so forth. And what it did, which I think to a great extent was because of the values that Kalanick himself held as a person, was it really created very, very competitive culture. So these are the dangers, I think, of having expectations like that people will go into overdrive over those things. And in your case, I was curious, for example, never settle for average. Could this potentially lead to paralyzing perfectionism? Or the other one, being helpful always, which I love, but I'm thinking, could this lead potentially to lack of focus and burnout when you always try to be helpful to others? Maybe you cannot focus on your own priorities. And I'm sure that you've thought about those things and figured out, how do we prevent people from going into overdrive on those things? So have you? And if yes, what are you doing so that you don't get the negative side of those really positive things?
Yes, you're absolutely right. And it's all about balance. So our values are one thing, and well-being, as I said at the beginning, was one of them. The behavior is something that matches the values. So, we don't have this value, but it's inherent in our business. But if value was honesty, handing in a wallet that you found on the floor is the behavior. These things have to have an alignment. So in our business, all of those Stunning Colleague behaviors are the behaviors we're expecting, but the values we have that sit under them are fun, adventure, creativity, innovation, and well-being. So if I just look at well-being, it's incredible how self-regulating a team can be once working with the right language. And we have well-being check-ins with people on a regular basis, and we ask them about their general state of health, covering 4 questions. Are they taking their holiday? Because we know that everybody needs to take time out of our business. We're not robots yet. We need to have time to recharge. Secondly, are they taking their Propel days? So having time for themselves. We offer 12 days a year, a day a month, to go and propel yourself forward. It's about personal development and focusing on something you really want to learn. I'm not too worried about what people do on those days, although I'm very happy to talk about it. What I want to see is the impact back in the business when they come back. Thirdly, it's about coaching. We have a resident coach in the business, and on a voluntary basis, people will work with that coach on a particular issue or project that they've got going. And if people aren't taking their Propel days, or they haven't volunteered to work with a coach, I start to question how seriously they're taking their own personal development. And it's a question that we ask on a regular basis. And fourthly, are they taking advantage of the health cash plan? Again, I don't need to know what they're using on the cash plan, but do they know they can claim for dentistry and acupuncture and all those kind of things? And when you start to have that kind of conversation about well-being in light of the Stunning Colleague requirements, intent behind the behaviours, always other things come up. And it's about the business, as I say, going with intention to enable people to be the best they can be and do the work of their lives, and create a space for them to talk about things that aren't working and how things can change to be better. because if you don't listen to people, you'll be surrounded by people with nothing to say. So it's wonderful to set these intentions. It's wonderful to give, guidelines, but you need to be having conversations because we're humans and we need to be working this stuff out together, and it will constantly evolve.
Yes, that is amazing. Those check-ins. So how often do you do them with your employees?
It depends on how busy we are, which unfortunately that's the trade-off. But we try and do them every 6 months as a minimum. And if people need more, we can do more.
Yeah, this is incredible because, for example, Netflix, it had unlimited holiday days as well. But the problem was that no one ever took those days. And so I think what you are doing is you are actively encouraging people to take those days and take advantage of all the perks and benefits that they have, and make sure that they really take care of their well-being. So it's not just empty words, but you actively and practically demonstrate that you are invested in it.
And when you're working in an environment where people are expected to come up with ideas and be innovative and creative, they can't do it if they didn't, leave work till 2 a.m. because they're working on a pitch and they're back in the office at 8. That is a ridiculous way to run a business. Yes. You need to give people the human space that they need.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So let's shift gears a little bit, because I want us to move into I can already tell that it's going to be my favorite part of the conversation, which is about your focus on employee dreams, your team's dreams. And I just found it moving and inspiring and such a genuinely wonderful and brave idea as well. So tell us all about it. First of all, I think what I'm curious about is, how did you come up with the idea of making your employee dreams part of your strategy? What has driven you to arrive at? Was it spontaneous? Was it very intentional? And then tell us a little bit how it plays out and what happens and what impact it had on your business.
Yes, it goes right back to the principle that everyone has the right to enjoy what they're doing every day, and we all want to enjoy what we're doing every day. And as we talked about it, we discussed it more, and well-being was very much the foundation of the business. And we realized, all of us have side hustles. And wouldn't it be wonderful if a side hustle could be brought into the business at any moment? Yeah. Because the more that can happen, the more engaged you're going to be in business overall. So if you bring more of the outside in, what does that look like? And how can we make it so that people in the business feel safe with bringing more of the outside in? So, and I need to give Jack Hubbard credit for this one, because he came up with the idea of the Dream Ball machine, which is, and people will need to go with me on this one, it's we have an old-fashioned sweet dispenser in the business. It's about 5 foot high. It's got a glass dome on the top. And inside that dome, there are capsules. And inside each capsule is the name of each employee. And if we hit a target, or we win an award, or just because it's sunny, because there's no rules around dreams, we aim to release a dream ball and make that person's dream come true. Now, why do we do that? Well, how do we know what their dreams are even? We have a dream consultation with people, and we ask them what their dreams are and what they're interested in. And the whole thing about talking about dreams is about bringing people's side hustles in, but it also gets them thinking what else they could contribute to the business. So we've made a number of people's dreams come true. And if the business is in tough times, that thing goes on the back burner, because actually we've got to focus on getting the money in, so there's a balance between people and profit. But it's not all about waiting for your dream ball to drop. We've had some brilliant dreams that people have talked about that have actually made it onto our business plan. So this is where bringing culture and engagement and people into the business can actually have a huge impact on your bottom line. And I'll just give you 2 examples of that.
Please do. Yeah, I'd love you to share this story.
Because people are a bit skeptical at this point. One of our team, Andy, is a huge cycling fan. He cycles hundreds of miles every month, gets others enthused to ride, and does charity events. And basically, he lives and breathes the sport. And he wanted to work with cycling clients. So this one's quite easy. When an opportunity came up, we started looking for cycling clients, and we knew Andy would be the perfect person to put in the pitch. And he was, and we won the business, and the team delivered the most high impact work for the client, who was delighted. We helped them grow their market share of e-bikes by 32%, and more work has come in since. Now, that's a relatively easy one. If you can win business based on your employees' passions and dreams and side hustles, they're just going to be more engaged in it. Back to the Make Life Better question, are we excited about this client's work? That's kind of an extreme version of it, but it's a very easy one to find out what people are excited about and see if you can win business in that area. One that's been demonstrably high impact across the entire business and helped us innovate in growth is another example with Dan, who was one of the best technical SEOs in the country. And he came to us and he said he wanted to get into building and making tech. He did it every moment of his spare time and he wanted to make it his day job, so literally bringing his side hustle in. That was a bit of a shock for us because he was so good at his current job, but we trusted him. We wanted to keep him engaged, so we gave him the time to work on other projects. And cutting a very long story short, over time, he came back with a prototype to a tool that's well known in the marketing industry called Answer the Public. It's like a supercharged Google, and it's based on the search term that you put into Answer the Public. It returns to you in a beautifully designed fashion all the searches that are happening all over the world in relation to that particular subject. So say you put running shoes into Answer the Public, it would show you everything that people around the world are searching in terms of running shoes. So for a PR or a content person or anybody in the marketing world, that is absolute gold dust in terms of understanding what people want to find out about. So this tool has got over 200,000 hits every month with 10,000 searches being asked of it a day. It's regularly talked about in marketing conferences around the globe. It's been awarded top 10 innovation by Product Hunt and lauded as one of the best innovation tools of the year by Steve Waddington, the president of the CIPR at the time. And it's a huge sales driver for the business, and it's set to become bigger than the agency in time. You know, if we hadn't have asked Dan about his interests and passions, we would never have known. And this product would probably have never seen the light of day and never been able to make life better for the marketing industry overall. That's what we're relating to in terms of people's dreams and having a massive impact on business.
I can't tell you how much I love that. And I have a personal example that makes me really relate to that, because when I was, I'm not going to mention a name, but when I was still an employee working for a consulting company, and we were asked to innovate and think about different ways of serving our clients. And one of my ideas, because it was my side hustle and my passion, was to create content, write a book, create a podcast. And the answer that I got from leadership is that we're not in the business of creating content and podcasts and articles and blogs. And that was probably 7 years ago.
Wow.
And now, of course, all the consulting companies are doing that. And so it's so crazy because, of course, everyone has those dreams and those ideas and things that they feel passionate about. But very rarely will their company ask them what they are, not to mention help them to make these dreams reality. And I think you went a step further because you really integrated it into your business, which is just mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, and it's been a lot of fun. And, you know, we thought it was slightly off the wall. We had no idea if it would work or not. And in some instances, it's just not possible to bring people's side hustles in. So there's a bit of expectation setting required there. But in the places that it does work, it's wonderful on many levels.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can just imagine what it does to people's engagement. And so hence the title of your book, Super Engaged, right?
Yes.
And I think that it would be also interesting for our listeners to define what does it look like when someone is super engaged? Because you differentiate between engagement and then super engagement.
Sure. So engagement is when someone knows that the business cares about them and they feel they have a voice. You know, employee voice is hugely important, and that they trust leadership. That's our definition. It's slightly different for every business, but it has to be an element where people feel that they're involved and they're important and they're trusted. But super engaged, we've kind of taken it up a level where that knowledge that you're cared for goes further, and the business is doing its utmost to ensure your emotional and psychological well-being. That's quite a leap. Being cared about is one thing, but business doing its utmost to think about your emotional and psychological well-being, and that goes vice versa. You need to think about the people around you too, is quite a step change. And if you can feel that the business is taking care of you in that way, you feel very safe. And when you feel safe, you're better at taking risks. And we need people to take risks to innovate. If we're all in a fearful position, we are never going to be able to innovate because we're so scared of what might happen. So there's a deliberate reason why this is important. Secondly, has complete faith the organisation will tell them the truth. This is slightly different to trust, because the truth can sometimes be really hard. And you have to be good at sharing the tough stuff as well as the easy stuff. You know, a lot of companies their employees will just trust people to do the right thing, but actually knowing why something is done is really important, and having that responsibility that you can take on board. And finally, feeling genuinely challenged. This is hard to keep up, But we've got to keep up the push on challenge, because we live in a world that changes so much. Because if we don't challenge ourselves and each other, the business will stop and the business will die. So Super Engage takes those engagement principles and kind of supercharges them, so people feel they can take risks and innovate. And that's the reason why we believe we can push as hard as we do.
Yeah. Oh, this is so fascinating, because I've been working on my second book, and actually some of the findings from my research based on our consulting practice is that it's hard to say really what are the characteristics of winning or healthy cultures, but there are certain elements that all the companies that seem to have a culture that works, and you can see this in their results as well, are companies that are driven by a deep sense of purpose. So you check that box with everything that you've shared with us. B, they create an environment where people have a deep sense of belonging, which is very different from having to fit in. And really looking at your business, I'm thinking, if someone asks me what my dreams are and allows me to bring that part of myself into the workplace, then I know that I belong. So I think you tick that box definitely as well. Right? And then there is the sense of psychological safety. And Amy Edmondson's work, of course, demonstrates that as well. And it's all about the stuff that you talked about, which is bringing the truth and challenging each other and knowing that it's okay. And that we have this environment where we can do this and we know how to do this so that it lands well and it's constructive.
Yes. And I have to say, back to the recruitment we were talking about earlier, it's not always easy for people to come into that environment, and it's not always easy to keep it going, but it's really worth it. Sometimes people have to rewire their thinking that this is okay. And we need to recognize that, because if you're changing the way that business works to what people are normally experiencing, there's a little bit of kind of, they need to re-enter the business world in a way that they're open-minded to these things.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I can completely understand that. So there's one thing that I also want to ask you about, which is just reading your book and learning about how you cultivate that culture. I realize that you must be big believers in the power of questions. And so I wasn't surprised to discover that you are also a cognitive behavioral coach. This is something that our production manager, Lindsay, came across in her research. So clearly, you are personally big on questions, I can imagine.
Yes.
And so my question to you, Nikki, to help our listeners who are leaders is, what sort of questions are really important to ask when you are a boss, if you want to create a healthy culture?
It's a great question. A lot of the time, it's about accountability in the reverse. So instead of asking what someone has done, asking what needs more of my time and attention? How can I help you more? And taking on that servant leader role. And sometimes the surprise that people look at you with is like, oh, okay, you're not just asking what I've done, you want to know how you can help me. It's quite a shift. And that's a lovely question to ask. Or just ask someone, how's your day? You don't even relate it to business. I mean, the question about dreams is quite extreme. What do you dream of doing in your life? But asking some simple questions and asking questions that relate to the values of the business. So we ask about people's well-being. We ask about, do you feel like you've earned your seat today? And you can ask challenging questions as well as gentle questions. But I think it's about having the open mind to ask and letting people run with it. And the important thing about asking questions is you need to listen. Because if it's just asking questions for asking questions' sake, it doesn't work. And the ultimate one is if someone's replying and we're going through, just asking why. Why is that? And how does that work? And those questions are wonderful. It's seeking more from people, because most people have the answer within. And if you keep asking questions, they'll find their own answers.
Yeah, wonderful. And I think it partially answers my next question, which would be, how, as a boss, do you cultivate that open, inquisitive mindset in your team members? And I think partially the answer is you role model it, right?
Yes.
But what other ways have you noticed work to make sure that your people are open, inquisitive, curious? I know that curiosity is really important for you in your business.
It's It's almost hard to be in our business if you're not, because we're in the business of ideas, and ideas need to be generated from somewhere. And you need stimulus, and you need to explore, and you need to think. It's very hard just to go on gut the whole time. So the level of curiosity sometimes needs to be pushed, and not everyone is as curious as they potentially could be. But if you're in the business where you need to come up with ideas and solve problems, which most of us are, to be honest, you need to be curious. And if you want your work to work, you need to be curious about the problems that you're solving. So I think it's inherent in being in business that you need to be curious about what you're doing day in, day out.
Yeah, absolutely. And so to help your people to become even more curious so that you can really create innovative ideas, is there anything in particular that you do to take it, to the next level even? So it's almost like permission to play in your business, to be curious. But I suppose to be an winning agency, you're probably doing even more than your competitors are.
Well, one of the things that's really helped, and it was quite bizarre at the start because people didn't quite know what to do with them, is Propel Days. Taking a big chunk of time, a whole day for yourself to go and pursue something that you want to understand more, want to learn about, want to do differently. And at the beginning, people weren't taking their Propel Days because they didn't know what to do with them. It was almost so much of a shock that, I don't have to get a pro forma signed off to go on a training day and sit in a room with other people looking at PowerPoint slides. I can actually go and self-generate learning for myself. It was quite odd that offer, that generous offer, wasn't being taken up. So we've really quite pushed hard on Propel Days and given people ideas, share the days, share the output of the days, said to people, take Propel Days together, pick a project you want to work on together, but cultivated the thinking around this is you. This is your responsibility. We're not spoon feeding you. You're an adult. You're a grown up, and you should be treated as such. So go think, go be curious. But here's the space to do it.
Yeah. Do you remember the weirdest or the strangest Propeller Day that someone took?
Oh, there's been so many. There's been quite a few physical challenges that people have done that they wanted to achieve to help them, think and get into their flow. People have been to various lectures and conferences. Someone's taken full days out just to read and really immerse themselves in subjects. It's a complete variety. Someone did a stand-up improv course. It's very, very different. And that's been great at their confidence and how they present going forward. Sure. And sometimes these can be very lateral, and it can be seen that, you just give them a day to go and muck about. Well, maybe if mucking about is going to give them confidence, that's okay.
Yeah. Love it. I think that a lot of the principles that you've shared with us would be relatively easy. It's never easy, so maybe this is not the right word to use, but easier to implement when you have a startup, when you have a new company, and you don't have the bad habits, let's call them, or a culture that is not entirely suitable for what you want to achieve. I'm wondering, what advice do you have, if any, for people who feel a little bit trapped in a culture that is slightly stagnant or is not working very well, but the habits are really entrenched, the old bad habits are really entrenched, and they want to create a little bit of difference. Is there anything that they can do to move the needle and start moving in that direction of people first culture and purpose oriented culture?
I completely understand, and it's a real challenge. And my advice would be to start with where you can influence, because to be honest, if you can't influence the big purpose of the business that is 15 layers ahead of you or above you, or in another, if you can't influence that, I understand it's very hard. But what can you influence? And how can you change the day-to-day world of you and the people around you? And what if you had conversations like this with just 3 others, and maybe you changed what you did at lunchtime, or maybe you changed how you walked into work together, or maybe what can you personally take responsibility for? And these little changes could start to have big impacts that then other people take notice of. Could you suggest different ways to run a meeting? Could you be so bold as to say, I think we need to find out this information, or ask? Because sometimes people who are running companies are so busy, as everybody is, they haven't had a chance to think, what do people need to hear? Maybe ask the questions of things that you want to have changed. And I totally appreciate it could be very hard to do that in some environments, but if you don't ask the questions, you'll never know. And that's kind of the principle of the whole thing. If you're not curious, you'll never know the answer, and you'll just stick with the status quo. And the status quo is dangerous. It's a very dangerous place to be.
Very dangerous. I couldn't agree more. And it's funny when we think of a concept. It sounds a little bit cheesy, but I came up with this when I was in the US this summer. I didn't realize that it's so popular in the US. I don't know if it's popular in the UK as well, but there were a lot of restaurants that had BYOB, bring your own booze. And so I asked my friend, what's the reason that there are so many where you need to bring your own booze? Is it because of the alcohol license or some other reasons? And she said, well, it can be alcohol license in some cases, but also a lot of restaurants realize that their guests really enjoy drinking really good wine. And so they cannot provide that list and have everyone happy because they cannot have such a huge variety of wines. And so they allow people to bring their own wine to create their own wonderful experience. And I thought, oh, this is fascinating. And it kind of hit me that people should be bringing their own culture with them wherever they go as well. So it's almost like BYOC, right? Because
Lovely.
It's so true that we can have an impact in the radius of the 2 meters from where we stand, and we really can do things differently. And I'm absolutely with you that I think we need to approach these things with respect and understanding, because clearly, when you are a frontline employee in a 10,000 employee organization, yes, you probably will not be able to change certain things, but absolutely focus on what you can change and how you would like to show up, ideally, and just go there and experiment and start being curious, as you say. And I'm sure, because I've seen that, things will start changing, and maybe you can create ripples big enough that someone will notice and become curious what's happening in that team or in that department, and it will become a movement.
Indeed. And I know this is back to us, and we have a slightly different culture, but we talk about climbing frames, not career ladders, because the career ladders exist. But if you do things differently, you can actually create your own climbing frame. You can go in different directions. You don't have to follow the norm. You don't have to follow the status quo. And it's the people that get on the fastest that potentially don't. But it's again, having faith in yourself and taking a few risks. Again, I appreciate it's not always comfortable taking risks in an environment where it doesn't feel safe, but you can take a few small risks and see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Nikki, I want us to move to the rapid fire questions. I have 5 for you, and we try to get them answered in under 2 minutes. So let's see if we can do it. So the first one is about your definition of organizational culture. How do you define it?
I believe it's the personality and character of the company revealed by their connected beliefs, values, and actions, and the interactions of the group of people that make it up.
And what are the signs that a company culture needs some work, or perhaps even a major overhaul?
I go and do this a lot. I go and sit in the reception, and it's about how people greet each other and the company they keep. You can tell a lot about the company by those everyday etiquette moments. And secondly, listen out for laughter. What do you hear? Laughing predates language, and it's a powerful connecting force amongst colleagues. So those 2 things for me say a lot about culture, and they're very easy to spot.
Indeed. As a person who spends a lot of time in companies' reception, I absolutely agree with that. And what company do you admire for their culture, apart from your own, obviously, which is amazing? And by the way, just a quick plug, definitely for all the listeners, check out Nikki's book, because it's amazing and you'll get a lot of ideas from it. But are there any other companies apart from Propellernet that are worth checking and that you admire?
Yes, there's 2 that I think are phenomenal. Both touch. Buurtzorg, led by Jos de Blok, is amazing, leading healthcare revolution with 14,000 employees, maybe more now, no managers, and sky-high engagement for over 10 years.
We had him as a guest on the podcast.
I can't believe the impact they're having. I'm talking about Make Life Better. And the fact that they have lower cost base, but higher recovery rates of patients says a lot about their way of working.
Absolutely.
And the second one is woohoo. Well, sorry, I have to pronounce it woohoo, which is led. You get told off if you pronounce it the other way. Led by Alexander Kurloff, a wonderful company, and he has set up international quityourcrappyjobday.com. It's worth having a look at. There's a set of questions
I
there
will.
that
I've never heard
are
of them.
highly engaging.
Uh-huh. Awesome.
But people challenging the way that work can be done in a very engaging way.
I love it. Okay, I will check them out, and we'll post the links in the show notes for our listeners. And so, what books on culture and on leadership would you recommend to our listeners?
The Joy of Work by Bruce Daisley, who used to be the VP of Twitter, is incredible.
Again, another guest on our podcast. Yeah. So if you haven't heard this interview, our listeners, please check it out. It's in our archive.
He's a wonderful talker and writer. And Susan Cain's The Power of Quiet in a World That Won't Stop Talking. Yeah. What a wonderful read. And we have to remember that we are not all the same. And introverts normally have incredibly powerful ideas, but they're so easily missed if you don't create the space for them to bring them to the table. And Susan's book enables you to think differently about how you create your culture, from everything through to seating plans, to ensure that the introverts have their space.
Would you say that you are an introvert or an extrovert?
Well, it's interesting. I was chatting with family about this. I'm a learned extrovert. As a child, I was so introverted. I never wanted to go out beyond my set of mates, my tribe, because I knew them. I know that, but now I'm massively an extrovert. But it took time, and I think we can all, sway. But I understand completely what it's like to be an introvert and to be overpowered by other people. Yeah. It's quite exhausting.
So do you still need to withdraw after you spend a lot of time with people, or do you now get energy from interacting with others?
I get energy and I bounce from people brilliantly, but then I sometimes just need to shut down and be on my own. So when I'm with people, I'm fully with them, which may be a bit much for them sometimes, I have to say. But then I do need some time on my own to decompress. It's going away on a 3-day retreat with business is a real challenge because you don't get that decompression time. But I get such energy from people, but it has to be in a certain space of time for it to be effective.
Yeah, I'm like that too. So I need a little bit. I really have fantastic time with people, but then I need a little bit of time to recharge my batteries. And it's interesting, by the way, that you say sometimes it's much for people when you are fully with them. And why do you think that is? Do you think that it's because we're not used to people being fully with us, or what's the reason?
This was feedback I had all the time at school. Was you need to slow down, Nick. You just need to. One of my teachers says it's like you're driving a speedboat and you're quite happy at the front, just having one, and everyone's fallen off at the back, and you haven't even noticed. You've got to take, for my own leadership style, I have to remember to bring people with me, because I get so excited about things that I just need to stop and reflect and check myself to do that. So yes.
Yeah, I think a lot of our listeners can relate to that as well. I think especially people in leadership positions who are very passionate about their work, they sometimes face this challenge. So I think it's good to talk about this and just normalize it, because this is what happens when you love what you do. And so what is one thing that our listeners can do tomorrow? We called this podcast Culture Lab because I strongly believe in the power of experimentation, and I know that you do as well. And I really don't think that you need to have necessarily the right answer on how to cultivate a healthy culture, but it's important to experiment. So what could our listeners do tomorrow to build their own culture lab and start experimenting to cultivate a culture that will help them and their teams to build their vision to life, to bring their vision to life?
I think it's really simple. It's one, recognizing that you want to create change, but listening more, because the people around you will tell you what's working and what's not working. And it's back to a point we talked about earlier, why employ talented people and you don't listen to what they have to say, because eventually they'll have nothing to say. And I love that notion. We've got, 2 eyes, 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we should use them in those proportions. Listen and observe way more than you talk. And that's almost the introvert in me coming out, just observing and scanning the room and seeing how people are feeling and working out where the laughter is and understanding what is going on. Because it's all very well setting these leadership paths, and we can be on broadcast and expecting everyone to be keeping up with us. But if we listen more and create space to listen and more space for conversation, it's amazing what you can find out. And at the back of the book, and there's plenty of other places to find these things, but there's a questionnaire about what kind of questions you can ask people to understand what is going on in your culture. 10 very simple questions to see almost like a guideline on where people are feeling in terms of feeling really good or feeling quite turned off about the whole thing. If you start with the right questions and you spend time listening, it's a great position to understand what's going on and what you need to do with your culture.
Amen. I can't think of a better way of ending this conversation, really. Thank you so much, Nikki. It was so much fun speaking to you, and I've learned so much from you. Thank you for doing the work that you are doing, and keep experimenting. And then I think you need to write a second book soon.
Oh, there's the challenge. Thank you.
Because we definitely want to keep learning from you. So if people want to learn more about Propellernet and you and the book or anything else, what would be the best places for them to get in touch with you or find you online?
Okay, so I'm on Twitter at Nikki Gatenby, just one T in Gatenby, or on LinkedIn. If you Google Super Engaged, all one word, you'll find the book, or come and have a look at propellernet.com or the insight startup we have, searchlistening.com. You can find me in all of those places.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Aga Bayer, the creator and host of the Culture Lab podcast, and this is the Culture Lab team.
Production Manager, Lindsay Nunez.
Art Director, Emily Spencer.
Aaron Scott, Content Editor.
Sound Producer, James Eade, Be Heard.
If you haven't subscribed to the Culture Lab yet, you can do it on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and many other places where podcasts are available. If you'd like to subscribe to my newsletter, The Culture Lab Insider, go to www.agabayer.com/podcasts and scroll down to the very bottom of the page. That's www.agabayer.com/podcast. Also, we would be ever so grateful if you could rate and review our podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to it. And now it's time for the preview of the upcoming episode. And my next guest is going to be Mary Abijay, author of the best-selling book called Managing Up: How to Move Up, Win at Work, and Succeed with Any Type of Boss. Mary is the president of Career Stone Group, and in this short preview, she talks about what's within our control when it comes to our bosses.
And the thing we have to realize, the key factor here is we have to always say, is this boss a good boss for me? Because, a boss who is grumpy might be fine for somebody else. A boss who's nice might be great for someone else. We always have to take responsibility of how that relationship works for where we are in our career and what we need to do. And the key thing that people need to remember is that we cannot control or change other people. All we can do is control or change how we react, how we interact, how we relate to others. So if you have a boss that is not easy for you, you could ask that boss to do something different, but there's no guarantee that boss is going to be nicer or be more brave, right? So you have to figure out what you can do more of, less of, or differently to build that relationship. And truthfully, Aga, we all kind of like the way we operate, right? We all like I'm a fast talker, as you have noticed. And I'm sure some of your listeners are wishing I would slow down, and I'm just wishing they could listen faster because that would be easier for me. So we have to get out of this idea that they need to change, and we got to figure out what we need to do.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Culture Lab. If you found any moments that were interesting, inspiring, or maybe even game-changing, please share it with someone who'd appreciate it. After all, good ideas are meant to be shared.